Okay, so we're going to go ahead and call the meeting to order at 6:33 p.m. So the reason that we are here tonight for our special meeting is because an opportunity is in front of us with some grants from the state of Vermont. And Steve and I have both, Steve Petrick of Southern Vermont Trails Association and myself have both attended the webinars that were held to explain the programs, and we finally have all the answers we need in order to get this thing moving forward. But that being said, we don't really do anything trails-wise without it going through this committee and then the select board first. That's the new precedent that we've been setting on all these things, and I'd like to continue it. So we're here tonight to discuss these grants. The first one, the Ursa Grant, is rather easy to explain. It's the money we're going after there is for a project that we've already approved as a town in terms of the expansion of the parking lot up at the town forest, as well as adding the new signage and plaque for Phil Bartlett, and any additional money there will go towards putting picnic tables or pavilions in that area so that anyone who's using that property has those spaces available to use while they're there. So there's not a lot of wiggle room in that one, and that's a much smaller grant, so all of those dollars would be dedicated through the Ursa Grant specifically for programs that have already been approved. So the reason we're having this meeting tonight is to discuss the VOREC grant. Now, the VORAK grant is $5.1 million that's being put forward by the state through the American Rescue Plan Act. Each state received a certain amount of dollars to go specifically towards outdoor recreation, and Vermont, through this VORAK grant, is offering up $5.1 million of that money. From that $5.1 million, they are looking to fund anywhere from 20 to 25 projects. So it's a considerable chunk of money, when $5 million is really only going to 25 core projects around the state. So, like I said, we were able to attend the webinar, me on the town's behalf and Steve on Southern Vermont Trails' behalf. We had an additional conversation, but what needs to happen now is a decision needs to be made by this Trails Committee as to how we move forward with the information. Tara and Tom are both here to kind of fill us in on what Southern Vermont Trails is thinking, and us as a group need to decide, that that's the way that we've been looking at these projects as they pertain to Horus Hill. Okay. Tara or Tommy, do you want to fill us in on where SOVTA is at in terms of these grants, the grant?
Yeah, give me one sec to pull my notes up. All right, so where we are with the grant is with the Horus Hill project we're gonna apply for. So how it's structured is that they're calling it buckets, or like points within your project that kind of have separate budgets that you're going to put money into, and this is how your proposal is going to work. So we have two buckets in ours. One is the actual physical pieces of Horus Hill, and then our second bucket is going to be towards an educational youth program that we will be able to use Horus Hill as one of our resources for that. We're trying to design a very low barrier of entry educational program for summer for youth, for Dover residents. And that's the second bucket within this grant. The first bucket, the actual physical piece of Horus Hill, we're applying for $300,000. And with that, we hope to build out the trails, and then to put in, since the conversation the last several months has been to include some point of disc golf use. And so we would, when we put in the grant with our budget, that would also be within the budget. And also, in order to submit the grant, you have to have a project review sheet that has already been presented to the review committee for Act 250, and would include the disc golf in that. To have all of that included, we need to stay under the 9.9 acres of disturbance so that we would then bypass the Act 250. But regardless of how we structure it, we have to submit a review sheet before we submit the grant. And that review sheet needs to show 9.9 or less acres. So that's where we're at. We have all of the trails stuff worked out and the budget worked out for that. We just need the pieces for the disc golf on that.
I will start. I did, in talking with Steve, try to reiterate the point that this would be a partnership with SoVTA because it is our property, and that I don't want us to get into a situation where we're doing something with Horus Hill that we haven't already been talking about or planned on doing or expedite just for the sake of getting these funds. So with that being said, does anyone have questions for Tara or Tommy on what they're proposing? Sarah?
So you said we have to stay under 9.9 acres to avoid triggering 250?
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah.
Okay, so when they count acreage, do they measure the width of a trail times the length of the trail, not the land mass that it's on, right?
Right. It's the width of the trail, like the treadway, and then there's a formula that also takes into effect how many inches off the treadway, because obviously you can't just drive a shovel and it's going to be a clean edge. But yeah, that's exactly how they do it.
Okay, so go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so for every foot of trail times how wide your treadway is going to be plus the margin. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so then the disc golf would just be measuring from the area where they tee off and where the basket is.
So that's the thought. So for any tee off pad or the basket, however we're anchoring the basket to the ground, that is included in the measurement. Now, if we do anything past that, then yeah, that would also have to be included. Yeah.
Okay.
Paul?
So if this application specifies 9.9, anything less than 10 acres, and it gets approved, does that prevent us from making any changes to the other, 40 acres? I think it's 50 acres altogether?
Yeah, just
so then going forward, are we limited by changes in the rest of the property?
I believe, Tara, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that if anything we do over that 9.9 acres would then trigger a 250?
So from my understanding of this, it would be that we would, if we went in and did another phase on this project or on that land, then we would have to submit an Act 250 for that phase. And then in that phase, they would want to come back and we would have to include the 9.9 in that phase. Yeah.
So I just want to be clear, I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, but we should just go with our eyes open that if we do this, it could limit what changes we can make without triggering our 250 going forward.
Correct.
As long as we're aware of that.
Sarah?
Well, yeah, so at that point, to that point, regardless of how you do it, we either trigger the Act 250 now, which means that we won't have the ability to apply for the grant, or we trigger the Act 250 later after we get the grant and we go into another project build on that land. One way we get money, one way we don't.
Mike, I do see you. I have Sarah first.
So we can do the 9.9 now and not trigger 250 with the knowledge that going down the road, any further developments are going to trigger Act 250. And we'll need to be prepared for them. But if we trigger it now, we can't access the funds. I'm just reiterating. I just want to make sure I understood what you said.
Correct. There is some kind of stipulation, or I wouldn't say wiggle room, but the way some of the rules are written, like if we wanted to put expand a parking lot there, that it falls outside of the project, and that would be different and considered its own project. Anything within the mapped acreage, that's the project consideration. So there's a little bit of a difference there, but yeah.
Mike Purcell?
Yeah, I'd like to be clear that we accomplished it, at least, that the plan and the grant request addresses some of the larger goals for purchasing the property, which is obviously the uphill, the completion of the loop, obviously, and so that for the walkers to make the most of the paved trail, and then whatever else we can get under 10 acres in there that'll serve as cart paths and tee off, etc. So my question then is, as long as we're accomplishing that on the Horus Hill, does that preclude or does that change anything if the town's looking for money for like the rest of the Valley Trail that goes down to the on board? I'm pretty sure that what's on Horus Hill is going to be less than 10 acres. But where does any of that money or funding or projects fit into some of the other things that we're doing? Is any of that included, or any of that request included, and or does something the town does over on, say, the Mount Snow property, will that be the 250 trigger as well? I mean, I'm not too shocked about 250, because you were there with Katrin, and what you're proposing is infinitely easier than a condo subdivision, etc. So I don't think it should be as shocking. But
right. So all of those different projects, Mike, they fall under their
different
own
buckets.
Well, no, not different buckets. Well, if we were to use them, they would be different buckets. But as far as Act 250 pieces, those are all separate land
Good.
parcels.
Okay.
So they wouldn't count into that. Now, as far as the money on the grant, they would, if we wanted to include them, they'd have to be their own buckets. And
Okay.
Eric, you were in the meetings as well as Steve. So from my understanding, the more fragmented this grant request gets, the less solid it is, and the less money either money will get awarded, or the less chance of any money will get awarded. So what they've really have asked for or looked at is a solid packaged, non-fragmented project. And the amount of money that we're able to ask for would really wouldn't 100% complete or support the Horus Hill project 100%, but it would get us very far along, as well as we have the ability to use the funding for programming, which some of the other grants that are out there won't support programming. They only would support like a solid tangible build. So that's kind of how the two buckets, I guess you would say, were developed, was with the idea of what else is out there and what makes the most appealing package for this grant.
So I do want to just give everybody a reminder to make sure you are recognized by me as the moderator before we speak. Okay, Andy.
Yeah, thank you, Eric, for that. I was going to remind folks of that as well. It's super difficult to remember that stuff. I was thinking about it after our last meeting. I was a little heavy-handed with my points of order last meeting, and I got to thinking, there's hardly a town meeting that goes by when Richie doesn't correct me on Robert's Rules of Order, as I'm sitting right beside him being the town clerk. I know it's really difficult. One thing that helps is if you think, I cannot speak without raising my hand or being asked a question by the moderator. At any rate. So one question I have so many questions, but one question I have is, in reading the links you sent, Eric, about the grants, it talked about lead applicants, and it talked about groups applying cooperatively, and this property being owned by the town, it feels funny to me that SOVTA has already done all this work and is assuming that they will apply for this grant. Why isn't the town applying for this grant as the lead organization? I wonder, is the lead organization the one who will receive the funds? And if SOVTA applies as the lead organization, will they then hold the purse strings for this project and have decision-making authority over how much of the project is mountain bike trails versus disc golf? Why is it that this project seems to be in the hands of SOVTA when it feels like, as a town-owned property, it should be in the hands of people accountable to the people of Dover, like yourself, Eric, and the select board? Just a question.
Okay, so I have reiterated multiple times to Steve that, you know, this would be, if this grant is to be submitted, that it would be submitted either as a partnership or as the town. It's our property, and we cannot set a precedent where we are letting ourselves, you know, lose control of any of our properties because grant monies go to, whether it be SOVTA or any other organization that is working with us on these projects. So I have made it clear to Steve that this needs to be a partnership in us putting the grant in there, and there needs to be an agreement from the Trails and Rec Committee and the Select Board in order for us to do that. Andy?
Does that mean that we would be the lead organization and the recipient of the funds, or no?
So the way that they had stated it in the first meeting, or the first webinar covering it, was that pretty much the only way to receive these funds as a nonprofit organization was to be partnered with the municipality who would hold the funds.
So are we the lead organization? Do we know that?
Part of the reason we're having this meeting is that I needed to make sure that we are all on the same page, that we are on the lead organization on this.
Okay. Thank you, Eric.
Tara, did you have any comments from the SOVTA side?
No.
Okay.
So Tara, this is Paul Fisher speaking. I'm sorry, I should have said that when I asked my first question. The seat that I hold on this committee is to represent snowmobiling in town, and there's a trail through this property currently. It's usable, although this local snowmobile club had plans to make some improvements, some changes to it, just to make it a little safer in a couple of spots. And so the local club, the Stump Jumpers, doesn't need funds to do that. But I would ask that if there's going to be a amount of land that's set aside that then can't be increased, that we be included in those discussions to make sure we can still do that. We were planning on doing it potentially as soon as this fall. So, I don't know how much land you have allocated in your preliminary planning yet, but if we could be part of that, I think it'd be important. We wouldn't want to be limited from changes that we already had planned to make.
Absolutely, and Terry, you were in the run the other day. I expressed to Steve, and I said that I needed to make sure that all of the interested parties were at the table on this, because it's not just hiking and disc golf through the property that have been discussed. We had talked about pulling Mike and Paul in as well. Mike Purcell, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Did we ever figure out how to have a meeting about what to do with the property in general? I mean, meetings ago, we talked about getting a group of the stakeholders together, but I don't know that it ever happened, or I didn't see that in any of the last minutes or et cetera. Did we ever get together as a group to talk about what was going to go on there?
So not last meeting, but the meeting before, we had discussed potentially getting this meeting together, and we ended that conversation with kind of a trailing off discussion about who should be in the room for this thing. And as I was trying to organize it, I came to the realization that I didn't have everybody on the list that I thought should be on the list, so we spoke about it again at the previous meeting last Tuesday, at which point we decided that at this point, we feel like we're past the point where we need to talk about what's going to be happening on Horus Hill. And we're at the point where we need to get those parties into the room to talk about putting together an RFP to have someone come and look at what all of those things look like in the one spot. So that's where we went with that piece of the conversation. Sarah?
And I just wanted to bring up too, part of what the RFP would be asking for is for someone to evaluate all the uses we want to put on there and make sure that they can be done compatibly, and you know that property is suitable for all of the uses that we're looking at. They may make if it's somebody really knows their stuff, they may make a recommendation that we drop X, Y, or Z, or segregate the parcel in such a way. But we won't know, none of us are really qualified to make that overarching decision about what can fit on there and how to do it. That's why the conversation went towards preparing an RFP to get somebody at the table who could do that.
And I would like to just bring to everyone's attention, and I apologize for not doing this earlier, the reason we had to hold a special meeting to have this conversation is that initial letters of interest for this grant are due by August 27th. We have 11 days to make a decision. The reason I wanted to have this meeting tonight was so that we could talk about a recommendation to put in front of the select board, who meets tomorrow night for the last time before the 27th. Allison?
Yes, my understanding when I was reading it said it needed to be a dedicated project to apply for the grant. Is that correct?
A dedicated project for what, Allison?
To apply for the grant.
Yes, correct.
Right. So if we're not all in agreement about it being disc golf, then does that mean that we wouldn't be able to apply for the grant?
Most likely. Tara, from what you've heard from Steve, I mean, it is one of the guidelines. They're looking for projects that are, would be ready to move forward. And if we're not all in agreement that at this point that's what would be happening on that property, then we are further behind than I expected.
Yes, because my understanding was that money is not there for us to then get somebody in to give us some ideas of what we should do. It actually needs to be a dedicated project that we're ready to go ahead with. Okay.
Any other thoughts, questions? Mr. Garber?
I think that disc golf keeps rearing its head. Oh, Mike Garber.
I was just going to say, if you could get closer to the mic, because people over there may not be able to hear you.
Mike, can you hear Mike Garber? Okay.
Okay.
You're good.
Mike
Just
Garber
speak up.
speaking for the public, member of the Stump Jumpers. When it comes to the disc golf component to this project, I think this board has not officially embraced it and voted for it to go forward. And I think people are confused if that in fact is the case. And if it is in fact the case, then to just proceed with disc golf being in this grant. But I think that's some confusion that has come.
Sarah Shippey?
Well, for that matter, we never voted on anything. We never voted on snowmobiles. We never voted on hiking, biking, cross-country skiing, any of it. It's been a consensus conversation. So there hasn't been a formal vote on any use. Nobody's actually said, let's raise our hands and vote for X, Y, or Z. We've had multiple conversations that have been about consensus.
Mike?
I agree with you. I know why the land was originally purchased for the hiking, snowshoeing trails, snowmobile trails was discussed. A lot of things were discussed. Disc golf was not in those discussions at that time.
That's not true.
But I think this board should be ready to, yes, vote on all those things and make it formal.
Paul?
Unless I'm overstepping my bounds, I think I can get this out because from what I've heard, there's a bunch of things, a bunch of activities that are in discussion about being put into that property. I think where we are on this committee is we've said we're going to get some kind of outside expert to talk about how we can have them all be co-located and work together, but that planning and decision is beyond the capabilities of the members of this committee. So that's our next step. That said, it sounds like it's an opportunity for some money that either expedites the need for that decision making, or at least we can discuss some contingencies so we can get this money. I think it's good that SOVTA is going to actually do the heavy lifting to apply for money that can help Horus Hill. As long as we bake in some caveats that it doesn't limit us going forward and it doesn't reduce our purview over the property, things like that. It gets a little legal, but I think to answer Mike's question, we decided we're going to get outside help to have final decisions on what's going to be in that property, and we haven't gotten there yet. Right?
And sorry, Sarah, I'm just gonna.
No, go ahead.
I do have a comment. So as far as like Sarah seems to think that maybe the disc golf was a part of the conversation on Horus Hill back when it was purchased. So I wasn't here for that timeline, so I do apologize. But what I will say is within that time, we did receive the finalized report from Weston and Sampson, our strategic trails and recreation report, which very clearly states what the needs and wants of the constituents of the town of Dover are. Literally this thing is a roadmap for what we should be doing and what people want to see and how we can make what we have that much better. So we literally have a map in our hands. And in that map is disc golf, is, all of these other, hiking and biking, but different types of trails than what we may currently have. So we literally have this map that gives us all those things. It gives us the timeline on how we should kind of be tackling these things based on want or need. So that's, I think this group was shifted. This group was based and formed based off of that report from Weston and Sampson. So that's where the disc golf piece came in, which is why it is being discussed as a portion of Horus Hill. And I agree with you. We have not at any point raised our hands. I think the committee itself decided to go in a different direction to say, let's follow that trails and recreation, layout and see where that takes us. And as opposed to, saying like, who wants hiking trails? Who wants biking trails? Who wants snowmobile? Because in the long run, that may end up excluding something that should or should not be a part of the property, without even knowing if it would be possible in the first place, I think. You had a question?
Yeah, what's the flexibility on this? So let's say we are going into this saying it's about the trails, it's about the youth education project, it's about disc golf. And then we realize after we do this study, the engineers go, for some bizarro reason, we just can't do disc golf on this property. I don't anticipate that, but what kind of flexibility do they have in these grants if you can't actually deliver on the commitment that you were making when you petitioned for the grant?
Well, and that would be one of my concerns, right? Is that we don't want to apply for a grant that we don't know how or when we're going to use. So the idea that they have, kind of expedited this process and the letters of interest are due so quickly after all of the final information actually came out to everybody is, it's a state of Vermont thing to do, and there's nothing we can do to change it, but at this point we need to either make the decision to move forward or, or not. Which is, again, why I called this special meeting, because it's a conversation we have to have. And from here, I would like to take a recommendation to the select board and say, here's what we'd recommend you do. Ultimately, it's going to be their final decision tomorrow night anyway, but I did not want to take it to them without having a discussion through the Trails and Rec group, because that's literally what this group was formed to do.
Tara,
I don't know, Tara or Tommy, who had their hand up first.
It goes in order, so it's Tom.
Okay. Oh, I guess Tara. Mike, I got you too. Give me 1 second. Tara, go ahead.
So I think one thing too, I can't see who's on the other side of the table who asked the question of like what kind of flexibility. This is not necessarily flexibility that I know of as in regards to money, but as far as like how does everything fit on the property? We know that these are the things that we want on the property. The review that we have to submit is a concept. So like, we don't have to be like, here's the trail on the map, and that is exactly where this trail is going to be laid down. This is what we want to have on the property, and we know that it equals 9.9 or less acres. Now when the engineers come in and be like, great line, but it needs to go over here, like, we have that flexibility. It doesn't have to match exactly what goes in. It's a concept map, and then when we initially apply the first pre-app into the grant, it's again kind of a concept application. They don't need a line-by-line budget. They want a number, and that number is going to include these things. And so when we bring in the engineer, and the engineer says, actually, you need to put more crushed rock here, it's going to cost money, but guess what? You didn't need all that over there. As long as it all equals at the end. And that's the idea of like doing the pre-work. And that's what we've done a lot of on this, is the pre-work. And now it's time to bring in an engineer. And that's part of what is in the line item on the budget that we're proposing, is bringing in those professionals to actually come in and look at it and give us the line by line breakout cost. So.
Thank you, Tara. Tommy?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, so just to kind of piggyback off what Tara was saying, from our understanding, there's money available, and to a question earlier, it's money available to something that has been planned out and there's been some work done on it. The SOVTA has a few projects, and we just kind of feel like this one, being that there's so many, the town is involved and so many other groups within the town, that this is really the best one for it. However, this money does have a timeline. It's not binding. We can go down a road to improve, expand, but it's kind of like, you know, Dover should get this money. This should be the project for it. If this isn't the project, you know, there are others, but you know, that's just our feeling. We're looking to partner, and we just want to make sure that this happens, and that the opportunity for this money for the town and for the community isn't lost.
Gotcha. Thank you, Tommy. And Mike, I do have you. I just want to make a comment. So Tommy, thank you for that. I think our concern, you know, from the town side, is that we are a partner in the grant. Okay, this isn't, again, where we don't want to end up in a situation where, you know, the money ends up in the hands of SOVTA or any other organization, and then we feel handcuffed because those funds are not, you know, with us, or, you know, feeling like we don't have input on pieces of property that are actually owned by the town of Dover. So I think that's the main concern, is that if this application goes in, that it goes in on behalf of, you know, either a partnership of the town of Dover and SOVTA, or on the town of Dover as the lead applicant with SOVTA as, you know, the supporting organization.
Can I respond to that quickly?
Yes.
So I would just say that I would hope that us bringing this project that so greatly affects Dover, opposed to other ones that aren't necessarily even in Dover, would show, you know, our commitment to the town as a partner. Because again, this is not the only option, but we're making it front and center.
No, and I totally understand that fact, but just because the property lives within Dover doesn't necessarily mean, like, it doesn't quell my fears, I guess, about, you know, loss of input on the piece of property because the grant was managed or handled in a certain way. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do.
Okay.
I do.
Mike Purcell, you had your hand up.
Yeah. This money is definitely an opportunity, and I think that what they're talking about asking for is just, you know, part of the food on a larger feast, and there's nothing that precludes, you know, further development or use that'll be recognized by the engineers of the RFP. So if they decide, that's fabulous, you guys got a grant for your happy trails and your disc golf, but, you know, you guys ought to think about a zip line or a jungle gym, or I don't know what. I mean, nothing precludes a further use, additional use, better use, anything, once the RFP, guys get in there. So I think there's a lot of value, no pun intended, to this grant to accomplish at least some of the items that were on the list for reasons for purchasing the property. So as long as you guys are controlling it, you're not giving the money away. I don't think that's too big a deal, but certainly if the engineers say we should add or subtract or do whatever, I mean, we can still do that. But meanwhile, we got like a bunch of dollars. Hard. We'll miss out.
Paul?
Thanks. So I have two questions for Tara. Again, this is Paul Fisher, Tara. So first of all, you mentioned something about, it sounds like the applications require that the projects are ready to go, turnkey, and then the next step would be bringing in an engineer. Did you mean an engineer that would look at all the possible uses to make sure that they all can cohabitate? Or is that an engineer just to look at the SOVTA trails for design of them alone? Excuse me.
Tara?
Okay, so so let me just the first part. So it doesn't need to be necessarily turnkey, like we're waiting there with shovels. It means that we have a concept that is approved and ready to be moved to the next step versus we have this idea and it would be really fun. So we've done all of our due diligences on that. When I was talking about engineers coming in, meaning if this is our proposed plan and it included disc golf and it included trails, those engineers could come in and help us lay out the best way. Like we know we have 7.5 acres of trails and the other is disc golf, and there's land or space set aside for the snowmobile up improvement. Then they would help us lay it out within the idea that we had there. And then also there's a lot of water that's in that property that needs to be come up with some sort of civil engineering plan on how are we going to deal with the water that's in there. That kind of engineer thinking and consulting, I guess you would say. Did that answer both your questions?
Yeah, actually, I said that was one question. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Second question, just a thought. So first, I just want to say for myself, I don't want to sound like I'm not appreciative of what you're doing, because I think you're bringing us an opportunity, and you're willing to do some of the initial work to apply for this money, and it's a big opportunity to get the money if we do. So I don't want to sound like I don't think that. That said, just thinking out loud, if this committee is concerned about either precluding how much of the land we can then modify after this application or losing control of things other than just OVTA trails. And there's a question for you, Tara. Is there an option to reduce the scope of the application so that it's less money, potentially, less land acreage, and specified just for SOVTA trails? I know we would get less and we might lose an opportunity for money for other things that you just talked about, but it then doesn't limit our control over what happens going forward for other activities. So is that even an option? I'm not saying that's what I want to do, but I just want to...
I'm not following what you're
Tara, before you answer, I just want to step in.
Yeah.
So the whole idea behind Horus Hill was that we look at all of these things in conjunction with each other, because the last thing that we want to end up doing is saying, all right, SOVTA, you go put your trails, and then disc golf, you go put your disc golf, and then snowmobilers, or bikers or anybody else. The idea was that we look at this property as a whole with these things on it, because we don't want to have SOVTA building a trail or any other organization building a trail that then would need to be disturbed in order to fit in another piece of it. So
Got it, yeah.
I'm not I'm not a part of the committee. You guys make the ultimate recommendation to the select board, but I'm not super keen on the idea of any one particular group moving forward with projects on the property without the agreeance of what the overall plan for the property is.
Got it. So I misunderstood. I thought this money was to make changes to trails that are already there as opposed to building
No.
out a whole new trail system.
No.
I misunderstood that.
Sarah?
When they count the 9.9 acres, if there's trails already on the property, how do those get treated? Are they just grandfathered, or do we, like, I'm thinking, for instance, the snowmobile trail is already there. So if they only need to do maintenance on 0.5 acres along the entire thing, that's different than if we measure the entire trail. So do pre-existing recreational opportunities count towards the 9.9?
And can I answer that? Sorry.
Yes, here you can.
I'd love it. I don't know if anyone else can.
So right now, the trails that are on the property, which really there's only one actual trail on the property, that's the lower loop, the green snowmobile loop, and that is there. However, it's not, it hasn't gone through the proper steps to be included as a grandfathered piece of property. The snowmobile trail, on the other hand, from my understanding, is part of, like, that would just be an improvement, and that doesn't count towards our 9.9. The other, on the upper end, the upper, like the steep areas and the maples, those trails aren't technically trails. They are marked skin tracks, and there's been no ground disturbance on it aside from just what's been like foot trodden, walked on, beaten. So those actually don't count. That entire upper area has nothing on it. The lower area, there are parts of it that are like the trail part that overlaps on the snowmobile trail. That doesn't count towards our 9.9. But to Eric's point, when we put down this the network or the system that's there, we want to, take into consideration the other users that have been, the strongest voiced according to the Weston plan. We want to submit it all as a project, and that's really what makes it appealing to the grant as also a planning, like moving forward planning. We don't want to take out part of a project to put in a new project. So doing it all at the same time is, most advantageous. And I think from the grant selectors as well, because they don't want to be like, well, we gave you money, now you got to take part of that out. What the heck?
Can I ask, just because I'm not that familiar with Act 250, Tara, this is Kristen Mumford. I'm sorry, I'm the one who asked the question before. Every time we do a project, so I just want to make sure I understand this. As long as it's under 10 acres, we don't have an Act 250 issue. If we do this project in phases, or will we never have an Act 2? Is it just, Act 250 doesn't just apply to this grant request. It's really anytime we do a phase that's 10 acres or more. Okay, thank you.
Can I answer that?
Tara, go ahead.
So it's not necessarily by project, because you can have multiple projects on a piece of property. It's assigned per lot or per parcel. So the Horus Hill is a 50-acre parcel. That's one parcel. Now, if we wanted to go and then do projects in, say, Crosstown, that's another parcel that needs to have its own consideration under Act 250. If we went to the Dovertown Forest, that's another parcel. So on one hand, if we want to lay down 9.9 acres on a 50-acre parcel, we're going to put a lot more in there. Like, it's going to go further, if you would, than trying to put down 9.9 acres on a massive parcel of land like Dovertown Forest. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Sarah Shippey?
Is the 9.9 an absolute number, or is it relative to the size of a lot?
From somebody, if somebody else knows more than me, correct me, but I believe it is for the size, or it's per lot, flat number, hard number, not relative to size of lot.
Correct. So are you in response to this or something?
Well, yeah, it's about this.
Okay, go ahead.
So I'm just not sure I understood the answer. So if there's a project for 9.9 or less than 10 acres, that's it for that parcel then, right? There can't a year later be another subset, right?
Not without then triggering.
I'm saying without triggering Act 250.
An Act 250.
Right.
Yeah, okay, I just want to make sure it's clear.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Sarah?
However, once
Oh, Tara, hang on. Tara, hang on one
Realistically,
second.
at some point, it sounds like we're going to encounter Act 250, and I think if we approach this like no matter what, we can't trigger Act 250, I think we're shortchanging the opportunity for what we can do with the parcel. So maybe for right now, we definitely want to keep it under 9.9 because we want to get this part moving forward. But I don't think that we should be so trigger happy or, so gun shy about 250 by itself, because that's a lot of land that we're not going to use. I mean, what if we did a 9.9 acre piece up in the town forest and we couldn't do anything else in the town forest? That seems unrealistic too. So I think short term we think about Act 250, but long term we should just accept the fact that it's going to get triggered and we're going to need to deal with it.
Tara, did you have a comment?
I was going to say, kind of to Sarah's point, that is correct. We are going to have to deal with it. It's kind of a matter of time of when, but remember, it's not for our master plan project. It's per parcel. So for Horus Hill, this idea or concept that we have, we can complete this under the 9.9 and have a working piece of resource in the center of town. Versus we throw a little bit of trail out on Dovertown Forest and now we're gonna have to do an Act 250 for the next phase out there. Like if we want to do something that we want to show like we got something done and it's really awesome and it's in the center of town, like this is a great opportunity for money that's going to get us very, very far in this project, as well as being able to show what we're doing. The time frame is like, that's kind of our big crunch, is that we have to put down the project review like in the next week and a half. And that project review has to have certain things in it. And we have done our due diligences and we are ready to do that. We just need the approval for it.
Additional comments? Mike Purcell.
Yeah, the legislature was working on streamlining this whole sort of trail and recreational component and application process for 250. So, this is being done all around the state. Tara, we were with people at the trail building clinic where they're doing it in Slate Valley. The concept, or this ugly thing that everybody's afraid of, being triggered at some point, is, like I said, infinitely more streamlined and acceptable to the agency than, a 9-unit condo development or any kind of, residences and school impacts. Probably the biggest problem we'll have in any of the stuff that we propose is, parking. But as far as, places that we want to do things all around the town on separate parcels and so forth, if it gets triggered, it's not going to be that big a deal. I'm telling you. So like Sarah says, this is, shouldn't be something that we just shy away from entirely because, ooh, it's going to happen.
Andy.
So, thanks for all the work, Tara. And so BTA. I cannot see us applying for this grant with SoVTA as the lead applicant. I think that's a huge mistake. I think the town needs to take the lead on this. We've had contentious discussions, which members of SoVTA have taken part in, regarding who's included, who isn't, what uses are included, what uses aren't included. We haven't seen the map that SoVTA has created or that they will submit. This project is so important to the town that $200,000 to me is not worth doing it wrong. We need to get this right, and we need not only due diligence as far as the money's concerned, We need due process as far as all of our stakeholders and members of the community are concerned, including, disc golf and anybody else who wants a shot. I think SOVTA should be a major part of the application process. They should in no way hold on to funds the build-out depends upon. The select board cannot make any kind of a decision without seeing this budget that they've created. Whether any money is paid to SOVTA or not needs to be looked at. There is such a thing in public affairs as conflict of interest. If we're talking about creating RFPs and hiring companies to build trails versus giving SOVTA money, that's a decision SOVTA can't be a part of. It doesn't feel right to me. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that. Thanks.
Thank you, Andy. Sarah?
Am I correct in remembering somebody mentioned that any monies that come in must be controlled by the municipality?
So sorry, I need to confirm that, but I'm almost positive that they were looking for even nonprofit organizations to have a municipality partner to be managing the funds for the projects.
Okay, so that would at least perhaps allay one of the points that you made, is that the money would be controlled by the town.
Again, I need
We
to
need to
confirm.
double check,
I need
but
to
that
double
was,
check.
okay.
Andy McLean.
It may go a ways toward allaying some of my fears. I'd like to know if it's Tara's understanding that the money will be held by SOVTA or the town of Dover.
Tara?
From my understanding, and again, I didn't go to the webinars for the grant, but like Eric's, my understanding is that the partnership, when you apply as a partnership, the nonprofit, they're requesting that you're partnering with a municipality, and part of that is the accountability factor that the municipality holds the money, not the nonprofit.
Be great. Paul, go ahead.
So just, I'm not sure about another part of what Andy said. So in terms of the actual design, the layout of, how things are co-located, who would be designing that? Would SOVTA have the lead on that, or the town, or is that part of what's been decided already for the application? I guess that's a question for Tara, right?
Okay, so we want this to be like a partnership of all the parties that are involved in this. So that would be SOVTA, that would be a representative from the town, whether that's from this committee or from the whoever the representative is from the town, and also whoever's taking the lead on the disc golf, if that's what's decided to be encouraged in it, the disc golf lead person, and then somebody from snowmobiles, that together we would put the map in. We have ideas, we have concepts, we want to go walk the property. That was one of the ideas that was put out to Jeremy, to the disc golf idea of like, let's go walk the property and lay this out so that it works for everybody. And then we have the concept map. Again, this isn't the flags must go down where this line is, but this is the concept map of how it all works for everybody. And then that's what's getting submitted. Did that answer your question?
I think so. I mean, so you're saying that we'd create some kind of a subgroup of this committee, including SOVTA and the other interested parties, who would put together the proposal, the application for the grant?
Yeah, that they would provide the information. SOVTA has said, we'll do the administrative, the actual fill in the bubbles of the grant, but that this group of working people, whoever is the lead from each of the interests, submit what they have the idea of. We put it all together as a group, and this is what we're submitting in.
Sarah Shippey.
Am I correct also, I'm just trying to pull some things together, that when the grant proposal is submitted, we do not have to have a quote-unquote plan. We don't need a map. We need a concept, and the map will get developed in conjunction with engineers or an engineer who can tell us what the most advantageous layout is.
Correct. Yep.
So we don't have to actually.
Andy, just to confirm before we move further, just because it comes
Yeah,
back to the
right on, bro.
money conversation. Nonprofit organizations are required to partner with a municipal partner. Now, under this FAQ, it does not specifically say that the town must hold the funds, but under, any nonprofit organization is required to partner with the municipality to submit for this grant. If we were to be the partner to SOVTA for this grant, it would be under the stipulation that those funds lived with the town of Dover. Okay? You had your hand up.
So I believe that the application requires a map, which would mean there would be no engineer involved. That would be something SOVTA would create for the application, was one comment. The second comment was, I'm wondering if Tara knows off the top of her head, in the budget, are there funds set aside to pay SOVTA? And would you be doing the construction of the trails yourselves, creating RFPs, or hiring without RFPs?
So 2 points. So it requires a map. It's a concept map. It's not the hard map of this line must match this coordinate at the pre-app stage. 2, so would SOVTA be receiving money for this project? Directly, we would not be receiving money for this project. Does that answer all the questions, Andy?
I think so, Tara. What do you mean by directly? Would you guys be getting paid at all?
Say that one more time.
I'm just wondering if you guys would be getting paid for your work, or if it would all be on a volunteer basis.
The work that we do is on a volunteer basis, Andy. So it wouldn't go to us. It would go to whoever is the company that's doing the work or the engineers that are doing the work.
Well, it might seem obvious, Tara, but Steve Petrick was talking about getting money from the grants for his administrative work with me. So it wasn't quite obvious to me.
Yep. So the administrative work that I believe he's talking about is we're putting in this educational group, and the educational group requires writing of curriculum and all of that. The educational fund piece has money set aside for whoever is the staff members for that.
Okay, thanks.
Any additional questions, comments? Mike Garber.
I think since we're talking about administrative costs, could SOVTA take administrative costs if they so desired? I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with that if they're putting the work in for these projects.
All set. Andy?
The only thing that's wrong with it is if they make the decision that SOVTA is the one we want to do the administrative work. If they make that decision, that's a conflict of interest. You can't decide for the town that you're going to get paid, right? The town, i.e. the selectmen, Eric, need to make that decision and look at other possibilities. You can't say, hey, we're SOVTA and we could give this money to trail building group X or ourselves. Hey, let's give it to ourselves. You can't do that. And I've had that concern.
Shannon, you wanted to share.
I don't think it would be a bad idea to share that link that you sent earlier that shows the application requirements and some basic info, like lead applicants are required to pay project costs up front and are requesting reimbursement. So this is a reimbursing grant, which not everybody might realize. So I can share that if you would like me to do that.
Yes, please.
Maybe.
I have a question about what she said while she's looking.
Sure, Paul?
So you say the applicant, I understand the reimbursement part. Who's the applicant based on the structure of the partnership? Is the applicant SOVTA who would then be submitting receipts for costs, or is the town as their partner?
I had expressed to Steve that I would like to see it either as a partnership or with the town of Dover as the lead applicant, with the town, or with SOBTA being the supporting organization.
Gotcha. So, sorry for belaboring. So that means the town would be the applicant requesting reimbursement from
Correct.
expenditures, as opposed to Steve.
Correct, and that's, I mean,
Gotcha.
that's administrative on our side, correctly, you know, like, what, so. Shannon and any luck?
Turns out that our security on our new computers won't let me do that.
Oh,
Was that linked in the email you sent?
it is.
Sorry.
The one I followed up with, I believe it was Sunday.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can't.
Allison, you had a question or comment?
Yes, just a couple of things. If it's a reimbursement grant, that basically means that nobody's holding the money. Because you were worried that Soviet TA would be holding the money, but if it's a reimbursement, they wouldn't be, would they?
Yes and no. So I think the concern would be that they or any other organization could do the work and hold us hostage over an invoice for said work without the approval of. So by holding the money, we mean, you know, feeling that they have unlimited access to these funds for things that may not have necessarily been approved or warranted. Yeah, it's not just a bank.
Okay, so then my second question is that if it's a reimbursement fund, we've got to pay for it up front. So does the town have the money to pay for it up front? And if we do, and presumably when we decided to buy the property, there was money there to do something with it. So it wouldn't be a complete disaster if we couldn't get the money. But as a reimbursement, it seems that we could afford to do it anyway. Is that the case?
No. Well, yeah. Okay. Yes and no. Okay. So yes, we do have the funds available to be reimbursed through our 1% collection. It would just, and no, this grant itself does not cover the entirety of expenses on the Horus Hill property as it pertains to everything that we've talked about having or doing on the property. This is a portion of what it would cost, and yes, it would lighten the load on our 1%. But at no time has economic development, either with myself or before me, presented a version of our budget that said, hey, here's $700,000 to finish Horus Hill, because at no time have we been at a point where that line item was ready to be discussed. So there is potentially the money to complete the project without these funds within the 1%. I think the idea of us talking about this grant is that this is helpful in supplementing those funds in the 1%. If it comes at the expense of us not getting what we want, or the project going in a direction that we are not prepared to take it, then the money is not worth it, in my opinion, would not be worth it to us. And that's my opinion from the economic development side. The select board may have a separate opinion from that. Tara, is that a new, Allison, were you all set?
Yes, I think so. Thank you.
Okay. Tara, is that a new hand?
Nope, sorry.
Okay. Okay. So Shannon has pulled up application requirements. And again, I apologize for the kind of the quickness of trying to get this together. I know it would have been handy to have this information a little sooner than this, so I do apologize. Anybody questions, comments? What are our thoughts as a committee? I mean, I got to take something in front of the select board tomorrow night, and in my opinion, if we're not 100%, then you know, how do we want to present that to the select board? Mike Purcell?
I would be in favor of moving forward as long as the town is the applicant and controls the funds. Take advantage of the opportunity because we can still keep working from there as well.
Okay. Allison?
Sorry. I would agree with that. I think it would be a real shame to miss out on this opportunity. And, you know, we're not jumping in with both feet, really, are we? We're just asking for some sort of approval, which we could drop out of if we decide it's not looking like it's going in the right direction.
Paul
I have a question.
Fisher.
Tara, this might be a question for you. This is Paul Fisher again. So I just scanned the application page. To Andy's point, it just says, in order to apply, you have to have done some, quote, planning and mapping of the project. Some mapping. I'm not sure what they mean by that. And I'm just curious, for the dollar figure in the application, does there have to be budgeting attached to that? You know, if it's 25 projects at $5.1 million, that's a, you know, 1/25 is a dollar figure. Previously, we mentioned $300,000 in this meeting. If that's the number, how did we get to it? Do we need to line item that, or does there be some kind of justification for the number we're asking for? I guess my question is, how specific do we have to be about the exact amount we're asking for?
Tara, I will take this one as they mentioned it in one of the webinars. So they don't necessarily need a line-by-line budget in the letter of interest. They are looking for a general description of what those, you know, what the total dollar number is, and a general description of how those dollars would be spent. You know, they don't want it all to be on posters. You know, they want to make sure that there's an idea of what's going into each pot. The full budget itself with specific line items would not come until we were invited to, if and when we were invited to submit our full application, which comes after they review all of the letters of interest. So August 27th, the letter of interest is due. I believe they said it would be in the later part of September. They would reach out to any organization who had been selected to submit the full application for the actual grant. So they're trying to weed out the projects on the top with the letter of interest and pull, you know, so let's say we cut it down from 100 projects or whatever in the letter of application down to 50 projects for the actual application submission. And then from there, that's when, you know, you get into the real nitty gritty of here's line by line budget, here's all of the full information about what it is that we've done to prepare ourselves to get to this point, i.e. the purchase of Horus Hill, i.e. the purchase of our completed trails and recreation documents. That's where we would be showing them that's the work that we've put into these projects to get to this point. But no, in that initial letter of interest, it is merely a dollar amount.
Yeah, so I guess I want to support this. I'd be more comfortable if in this committee we come up with a plan with how we're going to pick that number amongst this committee, how we're going to come up with that number. Even if it's a generalization, it can't just be a dart at a dartboard.
Right. No, and I totally understand that. I think the urgency of this meeting was that this application is due by the 27th,
Right.
or the letter of interest.
But by the time of that application, we should have an idea of what we want to spend and why, right? An idea of, maybe not a line item for each shovel we buy, but not just the dart at the dartboard, right? If we could come up with that by the 27th, I think this would be easy to support.
Okay. So, I mean, before we move into a discussion about a recommendation for the select board, are there any further comments or questions? Okay. So at this point, we need to make a decision on a recommendation for me to be presenting to the select board tomorrow night. This recommendation obviously carries a little more weight than the naming of the Dover Town Forest. So it's time for us to.
I don't know that.
Well, yes and no. Yes and no. We could make that happen no matter what. So,
I'm feeling like I shouldn't make the motion
Okay.
because I'm the select board.
Okay, that's totally fine. And if you feel, well, you can't recuse, correct? Because then we don't have a quorum.
Well, I don't have a problem with
Voting.
voting. I
Okay.
just feel like the motion should come from other members of the committee.
Even though she's really good at making.
Yeah, I know. It's like
I'm-
the best
I'm
of
the
making
motion queen,
motions.
but, you know,
We gotta learn sometime.
that's right, everybody get out.
Would anyone like to Mike, you have your hand raised?
I would like to make a motion that this board recommend, the select men board, that they consider moving forward with these, pursuing this VOREC grant for a portion of the activities planned for Horus Hill. I don't know if that covers it adequately, but that would be.
I
my
think
motion.
we do need to.
How do you want to phrase it?
We need to add the stipulations about.
Provided that the town acts as the lead applicant and or controls the funds once they're received.
Actually, I'm not making the motion, I'm just making a suggestion.
Sure.
Is that we're asking the select board to agree to submit a letter of interest for the grant, and that part of that recommendation is that the town be responsible for and manage the budgeting and dispersal of the funds. Because if it's a reimbursement grant, we're not controlling any money, but we're controlling which invoices get paid.
Correct.
Or submitted. We pay the invoices and then they get submitted for reimbursement. So we're really asking that the town have control of the reimbursement process and the decision-making process over what gets reimbursed,
Correct.
like that.
So Shannon, can you read back for us? No. Okay.
No, I cannot, because I have his and then I have.
So should,
Read back what you think it should be.
hey, Eric, I sort of wonder, so does Mike need to modify his motion, the wording of his motion? Or are we gonna do a new one? How's that work?
I think we're just trying to figure out what the wording of the motion is.
And then Mike's gonna
And then Mike can
amend
modify
his,
it.
yeah, okay.
Because we're deciding to ask them to complete a letter of intent for this grant, provided that they control the purse strings.
Yeah, and I don't, as the conversation has gone, and I'm just the moderator here, but would like to reiterate that it's not just the purse string, it is the decision-making process for the property as well.
Yeah, I think that goes without saying. This is just
Well,
a grant.
Nothing ever goes without saying, Mr.
It goes
Purcell.
with saying.
No, but I mean, we are, I mean, they all have the ultimately, they always have the decision-making out.
Do you want me to read what was involved?
Okay, so Shannon is going to try to read
Oh, I guess I can turn my camera on now that the sun's down.
the motion for us.
Hey.
Ah, Shannon.
All right, so I think what Mike said was a motion to recommend to the select board that they submit a letter of interest for the VOREC grant with the town of Dover as the lead applicant and responsible for the management and dispersal of funding. That's what I spliced.
Can I ask a question?
Ask Mike if that's his motion.
Mike, is that your corrected motion? Got a thumbs up from
What I
Mike.
thought you said.
Hold on one second. I do need a second on that before we open it up to discussion.
I'll second.
Allison seconds? Okay.
Yeah, I second.
Okay. Open for discussion. Paul?
So does that include the town having purview over decision-making about planning, about, usage of the funds? I'm not sure that it specified that.
Sarah?
I think when we get to the point where we're doing the line, if the letter of intent is, or the letter of interest is selected, and we write a budget, then we've got to get much more granular. We've got the line item budget, and that's the point where we're going to have to communicate exactly how we want to see money spent. And since the town would be the lead applicant on the proposal, the budget wouldn't be able to go in without the town's approval on it. Does that sound like I'm not wrong?
Correct.
Okay.
Sounds like you're saying if the letter of intent is successful, that doesn't require us to apply, just it gives us the opportunity to continue with the process. Okay.
Correct. Any other discussion on the current motion? Mike Purcell?
Yeah. I think during the course of this planning, when the RFP guys come through and look at various components or how things mix and jive and what will be cool and what's not. I mean, the money that you're applying for is BT's portion of what might be developed on the property. If the guys, RFP guys go, oh, cool, you should have like a snowmobile trail that goes all through here. I mean, well, then you guys got to, think about how to come up with that money, or you can't sort of steal from what these guys, the SOBT guys, thought is going to cost them to do their part. Nothing precludes more stuff when the RFP guys are around, but I don't know that to say, well, I think I should have some of that money for my snowmobile fence,
So that's not in my mind the way that this works. It's not like, oh, well, they got an opportunity to get this grant, but VIMBA and DVSJ didn't have an opportunity, so they got to come up with their own money. In my mind, that's not the way any of this is going to work, because otherwise all of the money's coming from the town, right? Or grants, from DVSJ, VIMBA, SOVTA, disc golf, in conjunction with funds that the town had planned on spending for this property. So no, it does not mean like, oh, well, SOVTA and the disc golfers got their portion paid for. Good luck, other guys. Like, that's not at all what we're doing. It's just, as I expressed earlier, this project in total is going to be more than we're going to pull out of this grant. Okay, this just helps us to chip away at the overall cost of this grant. So no, it's not like we're going to tell DVSJ or VIMBA that they can't come in and say, well, we still want to do this, and now we have to come up with our own money. That's not at all what this is saying. It's just that this particular grant is to help pay for a portion of these two particular recreation opportunities on the property. Further discussion, questions? I know.
It's dinner time. If I eat one more of those, I'm going to levitate home. But I will take one to go.
Our sugar crash is coming soon, so it's time.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Kristen went over and above. Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you,
You're
Kristen.
welcome.
For anyone who was unable to attend in person.
Oh, I don't know if I should thank you or not.
I have no agenda.
So, with no further discussion beyond donuts, we will take it to a vote. All those, Shannon, will you read the motion one more time? I apologize.
Recommend to the select board to submit a letter of interest for the Vorak Grant with the town of Dover as the lead applicant and responsible for the management and dispersal of funding.
Well said, Mike.
Okay.
Well done, Michael.
Nice job, Mike Purcell. All in favor? All. That's everybody. Unanimous. All opposed?
Nice. I'm not.
Oh, I thought you were.
No.
I'm a member of the public.
He's a member of
I
the
have no
public.
power whatsoever.
You have tons of power,
Nope,
Mr.
none.
Andrews.
There are
Not-
only 5 of you that are voting.
Okay.
All voted yes.
Okay.
Pole position for the donuts.
So
Motion to
we.
adjourn?
Yeah. With that, a motion to adjourn. Seconded.
Second.
Second.
Kristen. Thank you all very much for coming here.
Andy.
Tara, I forget the other guy's name. Thank you guys for bringing this to us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tara.
Well,
Bye, Allison. Bye, Mike.
you're the voice of reason.